Hello there, welcome to Rebel Base, IGN's weekly Star Wars show.
So this week, Star Wars Rebels, a really great animated series, which we're going to talk about more later on, came to an end, had its season finale.
It was amazing.
Yeah, we're not going to delve into spoilers, don't worry.
Yeah.
And another animated show has come along to fill the void.
It's a pretty big void to fill, but this week...
I've got a big void.
Yeah. I've got a big void, it needs filling.
It's where my heart lives. Okay.
But yeah, Lego Star Wars Droid Tales has just been announced.
Okay.
It's a new animated series, going to be on Disney XD, just the same as Star Wars Rebels, and it's basically going to tell the stories of episodes 1 to 6 from the perspective of C-3PO and R2-D2 in Lego form.
This sounds really good. You're selling me on this. Now, there's been kind of Lego Star Wars stuff in the past, and like my nephew watches it, and there's Lego kind of Batman superhero stuff, and sometimes it's like cutscenes from the games, and it's like not maybe of the quality that we've come to expect from something like Clone Wars and Rebels. I couldn't do it.
How many Star Wars films have you made?
4.
Right,
I made Return of the Jedi. You know, it's not of the same thing. It's more kind of kids. It's kind of like straight to DVD stuff.
Yeah.
And Rebels, obviously, and the Clone Wars, Dave Filoni stuff is kind of pitched, really as kind of like it's canon now.
It is, yeah.
So what are your expectations about this show?
Well, I mean, for ages, George Lucas has wanted to do a movie from the perspective of droids. Like, he's been going on about that since pretty much he made Star Wars, I think. But this seems like it's a cool idea. Like, I love the style of Lego, and I love, like, the humor. And C-3PO and R2-D2 are always, like, good banter together. That's always going to be quite fun. And, you know, it's something we've said on the show loads of times, how we want to see things that have happened from other people's perspectives. Like last week, I gave a thing for the spin-off saying, you know, and we'll have a Wicket movie and we'll see, you know, all the episodes from Wicket's point of view. They've pretty much stolen my idea. But instead of
low-angled shots.
Exactly, yeah. No, not low-angled shots.
shots.
No writer or directors on board yet.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Simon Kinberg and Dave Filoni, pretty heavy hitters that they got on board for Star Wars Rebels. So we were trying to think who we think could come on board to write and direct this. Now, Robot Chicken guys, we've said straight away, because they pretty much built their careers on making little Star Wars movies with action figures and things like that. That stuff, for me, for ages, was the only Star Wars stuff that I was able to watch that was new. So, like, I've got a massive love for the Robot Chicken stuff.
And I think that stuff is parody mixed with adoration.
Yes, definitely.
And I enjoy the Robot Chicken stuff much more than the Family Guy stuff. Even though I think the Family Guy stuff is great because it's kind of interesting. It's like extended parody, which becomes something else than parody. What I like about the Robot Chicken stuff is it has obviously a deep understanding of Star Wars, and it knows how to extrapolate comedy from that.
Definitely.
Whereas the Family Guy stuff is maybe more retread.
That's right.
So I think they could bring a lot to it, and I think R2-D2 and C-3PO are a great comedy duo.
Definitely, yeah. And we're also thinking, like, I mean, that's an Adult Swim thing, and there's so many great Adult Swim shows like Venture Brothers. They've got just a pool of writers and directors working in animation they could bring on. But they could also bring on people like Simon Pegg.
Yeah, so going away from the Robot Chicken stable, I'm thinking Simon Pegg. Now, we know he is a long-time Star Wars fan.
Exactly, yeah.
Growing up in Britain, watching Space, which I know has found its way to America.
Yeah.
You realise how important Star Wars was for him growing up as, you know, a creative force. And even though he might not be the biggest fan of the prequels, as that show demonstrates, I think he obviously has an understanding of comedy, understands the original films like the back of his hand, writes duos. Very often, you know, his scripts centre around a duo of characters, him and Nick Frost. So it'd be really great to get his perspective on it. And I also think, even though he's no great fan of the prequels, it might be interesting to see his take on them.
Definitely, yeah.
And even kind of playing that up a little bit.
Yeah, you know, and sort of like almost
ridiculing, but
a little bit funny, a little bit tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. And I think, you know, it's not beyond him to do it either, because he still writes scripts constantly. Like, he's been brought on board to write Star Trek.
That's the only thing, is scheduling, because he's a very busy man now.
That is true.
He's retired from Twitter as well.
Has he?
He's too busy to be on the Twitters.
Well, we've got one more as well. So, I mean, one huge film last year was the Lego Movie. So we had Chris Miller and Phil Lord, who, you know, they did such a good job bringing Lego to life. You know, you'd think it's quite a bit of a no-brainer to get them involved.
There's a bit of Star Wars Lego, just a little bit of Star Wars Lego in that movie. Yeah. And obviously the Lego brand is super premium now. You know, the Lego Movie demonstrated that. Lego's revenue is up every single year. Yeah. So I think they might want to treat this as a really precious product, because you're bringing together Lego, which is super premium, and then you're trying to relaunch Star Wars in a new way this year.
Let's do it. Let's get them on board. But that's who we want to write Lego Star Wars Droid Tales. Who do you think should be up for the job? Let us know, rebelbase@ign.com or in the comments below. So yeah, Star Wars Rebels came to a very explosive end. We're not going to be talking about spoilers this week because I want you to experience it as I did. And also, definitely, if you haven't seen it, don't Google it because there are spoilers everywhere on the internet because what happened was so massive.
When you say experience it as you did, do you mean naked on a boat?
That's right, yeah.
Good. So what are we going to be talking about?
Well, we thought, because we've enjoyed Rebels so much, we were just going to give you 7 reasons why we think Rebels is better than the prequels.
But before we get onto that, there's so much Star Wars stuff out there.
Yeah.
Some good, some not so good.
Yeah.
So we've enlisted the help of Eric, who's going to be recommending what you should be watching, reading, or playing in the Star Wars universe this week.
Thanks a lot, guys. You know, kicking off this segment, I know we're talking a lot about Star Wars Rebels this week, so I figured what I would recommend is Star Wars A New Dawn. Now, this was the book that came out last year, a few months ago, that really kicked off what we're considering the new era of Star Wars. Once they said that all the previous novels, all the previous expanded universe was not canon, this was the beginning of stuff that was official, that was canon, and very specifically, it was the introduction of some of the characters from Rebels. A New Dawn stars Kanan and Hera, you know, 2 of the main characters in Rebels, and really tells the story of how they met and how they started to, you know, really work together and get onto the path where we see them in Rebels. If you're a fan of the show, I think you'll really find a lot of this interesting, especially with Kanan, because there's a lot about his backstory that the show is touched upon, but the book gives you a lot more. There's actually some flashbacks to events around Revenge of the Sith era. Obi-Wan even gets to pop up in a little cameo. A lot of cool elements there for people who like that connective tissue. Also, I thought the book just overall was a strong book. I really admired that none of the characters in it were previously existing characters. Kanan and Hera were new, but so were all the Imperial enemies and other allies they have that we haven't seen on Rebels, which leaves us questions about where some of these characters ended up. I thought that was bold of them to say that yes, we're going to bring back people you love too, but we can also introduce new characters and hopefully you will love them too. And I think they really succeeded. I liked a lot of those characters. There's a couple that were in that book I really would hope to see again in one form or the other. So with Rebels Season 1 just wrapping up, I think if you haven't checked out A New Dawn yet, you should. I think you'll really like it, and it'll give you a little more insight into some of these characters we're getting to know on the animated series. That's it for now. Back to you guys.
Cheers, Eric. Now, we've put together a list for this week about why Star Wars Rebels is better than the prequels. So we're going to kick things off. Reason 1, design.
Design.
Yeah.
Let's
now,
go for it.
A lot of the characters and stuff in Star Wars Rebels is based on the original Ralph Mcquarrie drawings. Like, they've gone back to the vaults, they've gone to like the Return of the Jedi sketchbook, Dave Filoni and Simon Kinberg have been taking bits out and just, they pretty much got free reign to do whatever they want.
They've gone back to the drawing board of Ralph.
Literally.
So this ties into what I think they're doing overall with the Star Wars franchise right now. I went to Star Wars Celebration Europe last year, and Dave Filoni was there, and Kathleen Kennedy was there talking about the films they were making. And Ralph Mcquarrie came up in both lectures, both talks, and I think it's just, there's something about the style of his original drawings. He also did production design on other films like E.T. and Cocoon. But there's something about, he established the kind of visual grammar of Star Wars. And if you look at the Force Awakens trailers, there's even stuff in there that owes a debt to Mcquarrie. And Dave Filoni talked about on Rebels how they created a set of digital brushes that would recreate his style of work.
Really?
So it really just, he is synonymous with Star Wars and the look of it.
If you look at the design for Zeb as well, this is the more interesting thing for me. It is pretty much exactly how Chewbacca was originally drawn by him. And it really works in the show as well, because you've got this sort of hulking creature, but he's got a little bit, tiny bit more personality for him, but it just adds another level of depth to it.
Okay, Gav, but why is that better than the prequels?
It's better because it feels like Star Wars.
I have a big problem in general with prequel stuff because they have to like reverse engineer technology.
Exactly,
and they have to like backdate it, almost trace it back.
Odd.
Which is strange because it's not as creative.
No.
Because you have to like almost copy something or work it back to a more kind of basic form. And just a lot of it, they didn't really do that as much, and a lot of it was kind of derivative rather than being exciting and new.
Exactly. Next up, no condescending plots. Now this is a really, really big one because a lot of the time when you're watching the episodes, it almost feels like you've missed something because it doesn't waste time with building up anything at all. It literally just chucks you in the deep end, sometimes right in the middle of missions, and like, it can be a tad confusing sometimes. There's one particular, in episode 4, Breaking Ranks, you see Ezra, who's like the main character. He has infiltrated the Stormtroopers sort of academy, which is a huge, huge part of the entire series. But they don't talk about this barely on the show before it. There's not like a big thing where they're like planning the mission and they're going, right, this is how we're going to do it. It's literally, the episode starts, he's already there, you've missed all the sort of preamble, and then it's just, you're sort of dumped right in the middle for like the real juicy bits.
Yeah, so that's kind of similar to what they do in ancient Greek poetry from the Iliad and Homer onwards. Am I condescending at all? No, okay.
And why is this better than the prequels? Because one of the worst things about the prequels, I think, is how much time they spend just wasting time with all this exposition, like all the Senate stuff and things like that, which is interesting, and it does build up for things later on. But you just don't need it.
It's just a more artful, elegant way to tell a story, is to show and don't tell. I think the prequels get too bogged down telling you the story of Anakin Skywalker's fall into Vader, rather than just showing it to you.
Exactly, yeah. What's next, Daniel?
Space.
That's right.
Because after all, it is called Star Wars. And Rebels is really great because it still gives you those kind of epic dogfights.
Definitely.
There's large parts of episodes which are set entirely in space.
That's right, yeah.
And that kind of reminds me strongly of the original. Pretty much most of my favourite scenes in the original, it's like the trench run and stuff like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Or being in the cockpit of Millennium Falcon.
Exactly, yeah. For me, when I think of Star Wars, I think of them arguing and bickering in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. That happens all the time in Star Wars Rebels. So much of it takes place aboard their vessel, the Ghost.
Which is strongly reminiscent of...
It's pretty much Millennium Falcon, And why is that better than the prequels?
Because it's basically planet wars.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, like, even though, you've got the Clone Wars and stuff like that, so much of those battles and so much of the actual war take place on the ground with, like, troops.
Underwater.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas a lot of this takes place back in space, which is awesome. That's what we want to see.
Spiritual home of Star Wars.
Exactly. Next up, cartoony action. Now, don't know if you've missed it, but it's actually a cartoon. I know, right? So there's a lot of action that takes place that it would just look silly if it was in films. And I don't know if you've watched the prequels lately. I have, and it hasn't aged well. Like, a lot of the fight scenes and a lot of the action scenes, because they've used all this like odd CGI, it just looks like a really rubbish cartoon, whereas this is a really good cartoon, and the action sequences sort of take advantage of that a little bit, and there's so many sequences that just couldn't work in the sort of same way. Reason 5 for me is the Empire and actually having a decent bad guy. Now, there is the Inquisitor, played by Jason Isaacs.
That's who you get if you want a bad guy.
And like, we've talked about him so much on this show, so go back and watch other episodes if you haven't. But he's just so good, and he's evil, and you can really feel Darth Vader's presence over all of it. Like, the Inquisitor works with Darth Vader. He's been tasked with going around finding Jedis and Force-sensitive kids to murder them. But why is this better than the prequels?
I think the prequels kind of go for this great, epic Greek tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy about the fall of this kid who's supposed to be the chosen one.
That's right.
It kind of struggles with the villain. It throws several up, doesn't really latch on to one. Darth Maul, everyone loved the look, has some iconic moments, dies, spoilers. Dooku the same, Grievous the same, the Chancellor's there in the background, the Emperor. It just lacks a really strong villain, and it obviously, Anakin eventually becomes one of the greatest villains of all time.
Of course, yeah.
But
he's not.
I think he wants to be really ambiguous and play with the idea of who's really evil, and it's like, no, in this kind of like high adventure space opera, you need an evil figure.
My next one, reason 6, is new characters. Now, you sort of just touched upon it a little bit now, why I think Rebels is better than prequels for this reason, is a lot of the characters in the prequels are based on characters we already know, or they're young versions of characters that we know what happens to them, sort of thing. Whereas this, because it's a new cast, they sort of have a little tiny bit more free reign with them, and because it's a TV show as well, there's so much we don't actually know about them, and it sort of feels like it's going in a really, really good place. It's almost like the way that they put them together is almost reminiscent of like Firefly, like sort of like a ragtag bunch of sort of like space pirates tooling around doing cool stuff for the Rebels.
And this puts them in from the get-go, a much stronger position than the prequels, where you're kind of retracing steps that you can kind of already infer for yourself. This gives them much more creative freedom, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah. Final reason then is General Excitement. Now, it's not a new character called General Excitement. It's just the fact that it left me at the end of the series so excited for Star Wars. And like a lot of that, I think there's the fact that, there's really cool little Easter eggs like peppered throughout. Like there's a little bit where you see the droid RX-24 from the Star Tours, and he's voiced by the same guy. He looks exactly the same, but he's sort of updated. There's a couple of other bits where you see sort of old Luke from the comics there. Like he's not playing Luke Skywalker, because that sort of doesn't fit in with that timeline, but he's there and you can see it, and you can see that the people making it are genuinely having a lot of fun, whereas I don't think anybody had fun making the prequels. Maybe they did, I don't know.
Guys who do green screen.
Yeah, maybe. The people who are actually making the cloth.
People who sell green screen, they're having a great time. What, he wants more of it? Got reams, mate.
Exactly, but I think because it just left me with a sense of excitement that I haven't had for Star Wars, with a new Star Wars thing, for years, I think. And, you know, as a new series being confirmed with a lot more episodes, so it really feels like they're going to flesh out these characters who we've grown to love over a very, very short period of time.
So those are 7 reasons we think Star Wars Rebels is better than the prequels, or maybe 7 reasons you should watch it to get excited for The Force Awakens. As always, we want to hear from you, so email us at rebelbase@ign.com.
And for everything Star Wars, stay right here on IGN.